everyone, welcome back to our workshop series. Today we're talking to patients and hearing professionals to understand the hearing side of Alport syndrome.
It's somewhat overshadowed by treatments for kidney disease, but I know that for many Alport patients, it's the aspect that is most strongly felt on a day-to-day basis, and often the thing that people notice first when they talk to us.
For those of you that don't know us, we're Aura and Patrick, and we're patients and volunteers with Alport UK. Let's introduce our two speakers. Firstly, Stamatia Staikoudi, an audiologist currently running her own private practice in Greece. Stamatia worked for NHS Scotland for 12 years, 7 of which as a senior audiologist. There she looked after many patients with renal syndromes and hearing loss, the vast majority of which had Alport syndrome. We also have with us today Anthony Jennings, director of a licensed private hearing company. He also has 2 sons with Alport syndrome.
At this workshop, we're not just talking treatments. We've also got some fantastic patient panelists to talk about their experiences. In no particular order, they are Wilma Calderwood, Dan Long, Katie Brown, Max Stanton, and Susie Gear. If we get stuck at any points, we'll be turning to our kidney experts, who we've had many times on the workshop. That's Neil Turner, an adult kidney doctor at the University of Edinburgh, currently based in Wales on holiday, good for him, and Rachel Lennon, a researcher and children's kidney doctor at the University of Manchester.
I'm going to talk to you about hearing loss in Alport syndrome, which, as you know, is one of the non-renal side of things when it comes to the symptoms you experience as an Alport syndrome patient. Why is hearing loss important? Because it is a matter of quality of life. It doesn't threaten, it's not life-threatening like your kidney problems, but it is the very first sign of Alport syndrome, and it gives us an indication about how the disease is going to progress as hearing deteriorates. The actual issue with Alport syndrome is within the cochlea. You've got one of it behind the bones here, and that's the organ of hearing, and which helps us hear, and it is connected to the brain via our auditory nerves. The hearing loss in a typical Alport syndrome patient is mainly in the middle and high frequencies, so the mid and high tone pitches, and it is symmetrical, which means that both ears are affected more or less the same, and it varies in intensity. It may start mild, or it may start quite moderate. I've seen it in all forms, mainly in a moderate level, and then it progresses as years go by. Speech perception is as expected by the patient's hearing test result. And this is how we know, this is one of the reasons why we know that the problem is in the cochlea with Alport syndrome patients and not in the brain. And Alport syndrome patients present with sensitivity in certain noises. I've experienced that a lot with my patients. There's just some noises that they cannot put up with at all. According to literature, mainly noises in medium tone pitches. And the rest of the auditory pathway, the auditory nerves and the brain, the higher auditory centers, are absolutely fine. They just function fine. The only issue is in the organ of hearing. One of the main questions I'm asked when I'm talking to patients and families is what's going on with hearing research, and if there's any research, because obviously it is an important matter for them. There was a new research conducted in Germany, that's the Early Protect Alport trial, which followed children aged 5 to 20 years, and basically the results confirmed what we already know about Alport syndrome and hearing loss. If you ask me, they did not find the hearing loss that I have experienced with Alport syndrome patients. They found less of hearing loss with their patient group. The method that they used was not, it did not include tests that you can rule out subclinical damage within the cochlea. So they only did audiograms with their patients. But the audiogram, in order for the audiogram to demonstrate hearing loss, you need quite an extensive damage in the cochlea, 30 to 50% of the cells in that given frequency to be dead before you even get the slightest amount of hearing loss within an audiogram. So they did not do that. They did not check for subclinical damage within the cochlea with their patient cohort. So I'm guessing that the percentage of hearing loss that they found is a lot more compared to what was after in the end announced. And the paper was published in 2020, so that's last year. So that's the latest on research with hearing loss and Alports. What I always say is that for any unexplained hearing loss in children or adolescents, you need to have a urine test, always. And I always request that from the pediatricians that I work with. I just tell them, just get it out of the way, run a urine test, and just to rule out deaf renal syndromes. Hearing loss is important. It comes and it affects the quality of life of the sufferers, especially in the X-linked patients. We can tell how the kidneys are doing and if they are deteriorating, and you need to follow them up very, very closely. I mean, all patients, not just the X-linked ones, because from my experience, patients, because they've got the life-threatening side of things with the kidney problems, and they are quite massive, they neglect hearing. And they neglect hearing aids and looking after their hearing. And by the time they want to do something about it, it's usually quite late to get the brain started and moving and working again. Hearing is purely a neurological procedure. So the brain needs the stimulation to go through that corrected stimulus from a deaf cochlea, from a deafened cochlea, to go up in the brain and keep the brain functioning really, really well. Otherwise, there's issues that come up later on. Patients are having difficulty processing speech and noise. That ability is affected quite a lot, especially if you don't get hearing aids early. You need to get hearing aids as early as possible, and in my opinion, as premium quality as possible. My colleague who's going to talk to you later on is going to tell you more about the technologies, different technologies available. But from my experience, because I've fitted Alport syndrome patients with hearing aids, both from the NHS and the private side of things, the better the quality of hearing aids, the better the results, which is reasonable if you think about it, but it's not always available to patients. And on top of everything else, the visual problems some Alport syndrome patients may have prevent them from getting the visual cues that help you hear better, because when visual cues and hearing cues enter the brain kind of double checks. The lowest centers for vision and hearing are there at the back, and the brain just double checks that are the eyes telling me what the ears are telling me. So vision assists hearing quite a lot. It assists hearing about 50% according to research. So you need to not neglect your hearing, and obviously do work on your visual problems, but hearing is important. And use your hearing aids early and use them consistently. If you use them intermittently, your brain is going to get confused and it will get stuck in an in-between stage when you're not going to be happy without the hearing aids. You're not going to be happy with the hearing aids either. So you need to be consistent, and you're going to be successful after that. You're going to be fine. I know this sounds like a very, very brief talk of what could be a very important matter for you, but there's not a lot written on hearing loss. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Here are this is what I had to read in order to come up with all that and just make sure that I've got the latest information for you. There's not a lot on hearing loss out there. Thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stamatia, so much in quite a short amount of time. And I should say as well, if anyone has any questions, please do hit us up. This is going to be a patient-focused talk, if that wasn't obvious. So this is really for you guys to get information from. I did wonder if there's a scientific explanation as to why Alport patients don't typically lose all of their hearing, because that is a characteristic that we seem to see in Alport syndrome.
Well, eventually, age-related hearing loss will get them as well, like everybody gets.
We've got that to look forward to. All right.
There's no way to avoid that. But the eldest, I'm trying to think now. The eldest that I've seen was in their mid-40s, and they still had plenty of hearing left. I mean, they had the significant damage in their hearing, but it was aidable, and that's what's important. We could help them, and there are solutions. There are cochlear implants and everything available, but it was a very gradual deterioration every couple of years.
So
once the kidneys were stable, that's what we saw. No massive deterioration, just very, very tiny.
Do you typically see a sort of leveling off at a point where hearing starts to stabilize at a level that needs hearing aids, but certainly, for example, in early life, the hearing doesn't deteriorate any further than a certain point?
It depends. Yeah, with Alport syndrome patients, I've seen it kind of getting a plateau. Once they're stable, following a kidney transplantation, they're doing well with their hearing. It gets pretty stable after that. If their blood tests and their kidney function is not so bad and everything is, usually I was working with to work along because I've learned a lot. When he was writing to me saying that their kidney function is a bit all over the place at the moment, have a list that they needed their hearing aids to be reprogrammed, they needed to be checked again, there was things going on. It's not a massive deterioration when it happens, but it is enough for an audiologist to take action.
I wondered if we could get a brief comment actually from either Neil or Rachel. Do you happen to know what the correlation is? Is the correlation very, very precise with kidney failure and hearing failure? Go Neil.
No, it's very poor.
Yeah.
And, sometimes people have hearing difficulties very early on in Alports, but others only even after dialysis and well, actually, I'm not sure I've seen it after transplantation. And Stamatia, you just raised a very interesting question about this stability after transplantation, because it's true that the majority of patients, almost all patients with Alports, end up being successfully transplanted. And while they can lose some further hearing then, I think you're right that the major changes are usually quite early on after end stage, but not always before. So you cannot, I think a lot of patients of diagnosis has been missed because they had no hearing problem at the time they first saw a kidney doctor.
Thank you very much, Neil.
I've just got a quick question, if I can.
Just go for it, Rachel. Yeah, sure.
So that was a great talk. Thank you. You mentioned about the audiograms and the fact that you've lost considerable function by then. Are there any developments coming through that would help us to find changes sooner in the cochlea? And if we could, would that make a difference in terms of managing hearing loss?
Oh yeah. You can run a test, or an audiologist can run a test called autoacoustic emissions, and they basically check the cochlea for optimal function. And even if there's subclinical damage that would not appear in an audiogram, the autoacoustic emission test will fail. You won't get a pass, and it's pretty easy to do. And even you don't even need a nurse to do that. It's very easy. I mean, they are being conducted in maternity wards by not nurses. I don't know what they're bantus. That's what we used to call them, bantus, NHS. But it's a very straightforward test, and you can have one of the, I mean, it is an expensive device to have in a nephrology department, but you can send them to audiology for a quick screen. It takes literally 5 minutes, literally. And what I did in Edinburgh was prioritize all NILS referrals. Because as you know, the NHS waiting times are just awful and all over the place. So whenever I got a referral from NIL, I would just give them my first available appointment and not put them on the waiting list. That was an agreement with my head of service, and it worked pretty well because these people, they could not afford to wait all that long. It's just not right.
And would you say that when patients go for a standard first visit to audiology, that they would have an audiogram and otoacoustic emissions as a standard assessment?
Not really. It depends on their age, but an adult will only get an audiogram, and that's it.
Yeah.
Children, it depends on their age.
Yeah. Thank you.
Agora had a few questions as well. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you. Stamatia, I just had one question just quickly about, so we've seen kind of the declining kidney function kind of tends to drop quite rapidly. I wondered if the hearing was the same, if you saw a rapid decrease in hearing over quite a short period of time with people, or it was over a much longer period of time?
You need to appreciate that when I got to see those patients, they were already diagnosed with Alports, and then they were sent to me. And the vast majority of them, I regret to say that they had, the hearing loss was pretty bad by the time they decided to get an appointment with me, because they were mainly focusing on their kidney problems and not their hearing problems. So I haven't seen them from the beginning. I haven't managed to get my hands on these patients from their diagnosis. So I can't really answer that. What I can say is that, yeah, they got a deterioration. It wasn't massive in a sense that us audiologists would say, oh, that's awful. No, it wasn't like that. But there was a deterioration that an audiologist would not have neglected.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I understand some people neglect to go. Patrick, have you got any more questions?
Sure, I just wondered. Oh, go for it, Neil. Go for it.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that Stamatia, you've described exactly the position of most patients, and I think that most young people, maybe it's more difficult with serious kidney disease in the background, but I'm pretty sure it's an issue more widely than just in kidney patients. They don't want to admit their hearing impairment. They don't want to be thought of as needing to wear hearing aids, and they don't like taking tablets either. So there's a degree of nudging the patients repeatedly until finally they'll go along to you.
Yeah.
But it would be great to have better materials to show them in advance, actually, and that's something that we can work on.
Most patients were adolescents by the time they had hearing loss, so it is difficult for us audiologists to work with adolescents anyway. I mean, fit and healthy adolescents that only have hearing loss, let alone those who have kidney problems. And a good number of them, it wasn't their fault that they were not aware of their hearing loss, because the brain, the way it reacts to hearing loss, it just adapts to it and convinces the sufferer that everything's fine. So most of them, especially if we're talking about mild or mild to moderate hearing losses, they are not aware of the issue, not to the extent that their environment is aware of the issue. So we can't really blame them. Of course, they've got their kidney problems, but their brain has convinced them that everything is fine because the brain has altered and just adapted to the issue and altered the neurological connections that deal with the higher auditory functions to just adapt to the hearing deterioration, the peripheral loss from the cochlea.
I think that's absolutely right, and we should encourage anyone who knows that they have Alports, especially men, to get a hearing test and make sure that the extent that they've lost their hearing is identified. When we do these talks with nephrologists, for example, we talk a lot about regular testing and monitoring the decline of the kidney function. I was wondering how frequently would you recommend Alport patients who know that they have hearing loss should come back to an audiologist for monitoring the decline of their ears? How often would you need to see an Alport patient, ideally?
Once a year would be ideal.
Okay, and I guess if they see decline in their hearing, that their hearing aids aren't quite meeting, I guess it would need more, of course. There's a lot of questions in the chat. Stamatia, thank you so much. I think we should turn to Anthony though. Anthony, would you mind sharing your screen and taking us away? Note there's a few questions in the chat about hearing aids. I think Anthony is about to talk about those, so please do ask them again if you feel like they have been addressed.
Yeah, well, very interesting. Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone who's joining in so far. So as said, yeah, I'm Anthony Jennings. One of my sons got diagnosed last March, so I'm fairly fresh to all this Alport stuff that's been going on. So I've had a fairly steep learning curve over the last year or so, trying to get grips with it all. But hearing aids I know quite well. I've been around those for about a decade now. So the idea of my little talk is to give you an insight into the inner workings of the hearing industry, at least from a UK perspective, because it is a bit of a minefield. Unless you've got a loss or know somebody with it, it's a big mystery to everybody. So hopefully I can shed a bit of light on what's going on. So the first part, or the most common question that tends to come across that I've noticed in the chats, is whether NHS is good or private is better, and what are the pros and cons of each. So I'm just going to briefly go through some of the pros and cons of what you can expect from each. So starting with the NHS. Now the NHS can be a bit of a lottery, depending on who you see and what resources they have and what hearing aids they've been able to get from their CCG. So the main pro, obviously, with the NHS is that it is free. Everything's free, including the batteries, the service, and everything. The remit for the NHS tends to be that they should have a middle of the range hearing aid. So as I've put on there, as you can see, it's normally around the £2,000 mark in the private industry. The trouble is that they don't specify from which era. So the NHS hearing aids tend to be a little bit more dated because they are private companies that are supplying them. So they're not going to always supply their latest and greatest for people who are getting them for free. If you do lose an NHS hearing aid, you normally have to pay the admin fee, which varies to about £80 upwards. And you are eligible for a new model every 3 years if they have one. So you do get free upgrades from that point of view as well. And the biggest change in more recent years has been this thing called AQP with the Any Qualified Provider. So you can actually go to some private firms and get an NHS hearing aid much quicker than having to wait for a referral and going through the hospital method. I know a few companies where they'll even fit you on the day of the test. So there's a very quick turnaround in terms of getting a hearing aid that way. Some of the cons of the NHS, as I said, is it does tend to be dated, normally about 5 or 6 years old in terms of technology. And as I said, if you imagine using a computer of that age, there's normally a big difference compared to what's available today. Quality of the hearing aid varies greatly. Again, it's a bit of a lottery as to what they've got access to and what they've got in the cupboard. Tends to be a bit more of a rush service, but not always, because of the demand on the actual service itself. The models you tend to be offered are normally the larger ones behind the ear, because they're the easiest to repair and replace and can be used multiple times. And you're not always guaranteed to see the same person each time. It can be a big turnaround in staff, and you can see different people each time, which obviously have a varying degree of care. Now with the private. So the pros of the private is that you do tend to have access to the latest and greatest technology, which is also what tends to give you the best hearing possible. There's also much more choice in terms of style and feature. The NHS, you tend to be stuck with what they have. With private, they normally have supplies from a few different manufacturers, so you can have smaller and better models available. The aftercare is free, usually. There's very few people that will charge for that now. Most of them will give you free aftercare for as long as you've got the hearing aids. And they do tend to spend more time on the actual appointments as well. So they'll sit down, or they should sit down and listen to you and what your actual lifestyles are like and try and find a hearing aid that will match. And you do tend to see the same person each time. So you can build a bit of rapport with them. They can get to know your actual individual needs and hopefully journey along with you much better. Cons with the private. Obviously, the biggest one is the cost. Now, that price range I put in tends to be pretty standard for any private firm you'll go to. The cheapest pair tend to be around £500. They tend to get up to about £4,000 for the latest and greatest. That figure can go up higher depending on which company you go to see. Again, it's a case of trying to find an audiologist rather than a salesman. It can be a bit of a minefield. The industry is much better regulated now. We have to be registered with the HCPC, whereas before you didn't have to have any kind of registration at all. So there used to be a bit of a thing in the industry that you were definitely a salesman when you went into this industry, but now we do tend to have much more reputable people. The other thing is, once you have teamed up with a company, depending on who they are, they go by the figures that most people change their hearing aids or upgrade every 3 to 4 years. That tends to be pushed from the NHS side of things. So expect a lot of leaflets asking you to upgrade within that time frame as well. Most companies will cease if you tell them, but as I say, just that's something to bear in mind, that you probably will get a lot of posts and emails and things like that unless you opt out of it. What I want to go through now is just some of the different hearing aid types. So hearing aids are broadly put into two main categories, the ones behind the ear and the ones that go in the ear. And there's a few different types within those actual categories. So the first one, traditional BTE. This is normally what you get from the NHS. So these are the ones that have the custom mold that's fit into the ear with a thicker tube going around behind the ear. Privately, we tend to fit these to people who have issues in the outer ear, such as recurring infections or weeping ears, and especially if you need a lot of power, these tend to be good, very good for that. Because there's no electronics in the ear, which is why they're a better option if there is moisture there. They can be a bit tricky to keep clean though, and the tube does tend to go hard after every 6 months or so, so things like that need to be replaced fairly regularly. The other option that tends to be on the NHS as well is the thin tube, or slim tube as it's called. This is obviously cosmetically much better, but it can't fit as broad a loss. But again, there's no electronics in the ear, so less tends to go wrong with them, but those thin tubes can be quite delicate. They do tend to pinch and buckle fairly easily. So you do have to be careful how you put them into the ear. The next one is the receiver in the canal. So this is where you have a thin wire with the speaker part actually going into the ear. Now the bit behind the ear tends to be a bit smaller as a result because it hasn't got the speaker part within it. This tends to be the more popular option from the private point of view. And these type of hearing aids tend to have the latest technology in them as well, such as getting rechargeable versions and being able to connect to your phones and that. I'll talk about that in a moment. Going to the in the ear type. So first one is what we call a full shell, which is the one that completely fills the concha, so the bowl part of the ear. These tend to be very good for people who struggle with their dexterity. So tend to be for the older, it might be a bit shaky or struggle to hold on to things or put things behind the ear. You can get a lot of power from these now. Usually you weren't able to get a lot of power from in the ear hearing aid, but these can almost match the behind the ear now in terms of power. And you can also get controls on the hearing aid itself with the bigger type. You've got half shell or in the canal, which is, as you can see in the ear, is a bit smaller. These ones just are cosmetically smaller than the full shell, but still have a lot of the capabilities and connectivity of the full shell. And then the one that everyone gets seen on the adverts is the CIC, or the completely in the canal. This is the tiny one that goes down the ear. It's very good from an aesthetic point of view, but it's very limited in terms of what sound you can get from it, because obviously there's much smaller components inside, much smaller speakers and things like that. Also has a very small battery, which can only last for around 4 or 5 days. So expect to change the battery a lot with this type of hearing aid. Now let's get into the new technology that's available. So I haven't gone through all of the manufacturers. I've just picked 4 or 5 which have released stuff in the last 6 months. So the first one we've got is from the manufacturer Starkey, who also have another one called Audible. They're both exactly the same, they're just marketed in different ways. These guys have brought out the first rechargeable in-the-ear hearing aid. I've actually got one here in front of me. Now, they try and advertise these as an in the canal. In reality, they don't go that small. They're still quite chunky going. Have to fiddle around with the battery. You just put these into a charger, pick them up, and away you go. So from a practical point of view, these are the easiest to look after and to get into the ear. They've also tried to coin the phrase healthable, which I don't think is a real word, but that's what they're trying to get out there, where you can connect them to an app, and the app will will look after your fitness and how often you're using the hearing aid and give you a score. And now I know that you can also get Alexa through these devices. So you can double tap the hearing aid and tell Alexa what you want her to do. And that will all connect as long as you've got an Amazon account to link it through. So the connectivity of these things now is getting quite remarkable. Obviously, with that connectivity, you can stream directly through them, music, phone calls, things like that, which tends to be very good for iPhone users. Android is still a bit lacking behind. A lot of these, you do need to get a device that works between in order to stream to the hearing aid with an Android. But I know with the Asha protocol, I think that's coming out with Android, or started to come out, there will soon be direct streaming from Android phones as well. Signia. Now, Signia tend to go a different route to the design of their hearing aids, as you can see splattered on the screen there. I want to draw your attention to the ones on the right, which is on these ones here. So you can see these look very similar to a Bluetooth earbud, but they are fully functioning hearing aids now in that design. So for those people who don't like the look of a hearing aid behind the ear and things like that, they thought they could try and bring a more modern design to them. So though they look like Bluetooth headsets, they're actually very sophisticated hearing aids. And you've also got their ones in the middle, which they call the stiletto, because they think it looks like a stiletto heel. I've got a pair of those here. How they managed to get away with this charger and not get sued by Apple, I do not know, because it is exactly the same as the AirPod charger, but they managed to do it. So again, that's got a little pouch in there, and you've got the little stiletto hearing aid, which again looks very different to the conventional big blob behind the ear. So Signia's unique selling point is their design, but they're also trying to track the motion of people as they move around. And the good news with that is traditionally hearing aids in a noisy environment with a lot of speech around will go into a more fixed directionality in which that they'll focus more where you're facing than around you. What Signia's hearing aids can do is they can track whether you're sitting down or standing up and things like that. Because obviously if you're stood up talking to somebody, they could be to the side of you or behind you. So you want to be able to make sure you can hear speeches from those sides as well. So with their Signia hearing aids tracking the motion, they're able to give you a better sound from people around you rather than just the people in front of you. Widex. Now, Widex claim to have the smallest rechargeable hearing aid. To be honest, they're only millimeters smaller than some, but that's the little moment that's out now and about. Widex also claim to have the quickest or fastest processing hearing aid, and they believe they finally got rid of the typical hearing aid sound that tends to be out there. Now, that tends to be generated because of the slight delay in the processing of the sound of the hearing aid, which is normally around 3 to 5 milliseconds. Widex claim to have got it down to 0.3 milliseconds now, which is very, very fast. And having listened to them myself, I don't get that initial echo in my voice and things like that, which you tend to traditionally get with the hearing aid. So they tend to be getting very close to natural sound. How they'll perform in a busy environment with that kind of setting, though, I haven't tested that out. But from a natural sound point of view, we are getting very, very close with these kind of hearing aids. Widex hearing aids are also very good with the app you can have on smart devices. You can control a lot of the parameters of the hearing aid with that app, and you can even make adjustments on the go. If you don't like the sound when you're sat in a certain place, you can go onto the app. It will give you a few different settings to try, and then you can save that as an individual program. So they're very good for people who like to fiddle and mess. but they can also be fully automated as well. And they will automatically listen to the sounds around you and make adjustments by themselves at the same time. GM Resound. GM Resound have gone a completely different way more recently in their receiver in the canal, their RIC type hearing aid. They've actually put a microphone on the bit that goes in the ear as well. So you've essentially got 3 microphones on each hearing aid. So essentially 6 working together, which should give you superior directionality and be able to tell where sounds come from much better. Again, where the drawback of that is it does make the piece that goes in the ear quite a bit bigger. So it's not going to be suitable for everybody if you've got particularly narrow ear canals, which tends to be the case when you are younger. But if you can get it so it fits in, you should find that hearing in noise and things like that becomes much, much easier and better, because you've got those 3 microphones processing the sound together. And again, their app is very, very good, very easy to use. And they're one of the few manufacturers that you can stream directly from iPhone and Android now, instead of having to have an extra device in between for Android devices. Oticon. Oticon have a massive focus on how the brain actually hears, rather than just trying to get the sound into the ear in the first place. So they've released a new model called the More, and they claim to be able to capture and process sound or send sound into the ear in the most natural way possible. So instead of just focusing in a narrow beam of where the sound's coming from, these hearing aids will capture more sound around you and allow your brain to actually do its job and process the sound in a more natural way. And again, they claim to be the best in the industry from a clear point of view in a noisy environment. And again, they've also got an app which works very well, allows you to control a lot of the parameters. And they've also jumped onto the health bandwagon, and it will track how many steps you do and things like that. So you can link it all together. I think that concludes a very quick whistle-stop tour of what's available at the moment. So yeah, if there are any questions, fire away.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And I just want to offer a disclaimer that obviously that was a lot of information, but it's all being recorded. Don't worry, you don't have to be writing down furiously now. It'll be on our YouTube in a few days. I want to leap straight into questions, actually, because we've got a few in the Q&A. Do ask anything if you have some more. Frank B asked a really interesting question. He says, are there any surgical or non-hearing aid solutions right now available for hearing loss?
Surgical or non-surgical, did you say? Sorry.
He said the question is, are there any non-hearing aid solutions to hearing loss? I think that was.
There are. So you've got bone anchor hearing aids, and as was mentioned before, cochlear implants. But the level of sound and the amount of sound that can be produced by those is quite inferior to what you can get from a traditional hearing aid, with an amplifier and everything else. So if you've been used to normal hearing and then you lose it and get a cochlear implant, the sound from the cochlear implant will be vastly different and quite hard to get used to if you've been used to hearing before, which is why it tends to work quite well with those who've had no hearing and then get it back through the cochlea, because it's all they've known, and then they can get used to it from that way. There are other things out there where you can get hearing aids that are on spectacles and things like that. But again, that all comes down to the fitting and how well it fits on the end of the glasses, that you have to get glasses that match up quite well and all this type of thing. So they can be quite tricky to get right from that point of view.
Stamatia, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, please. When we're talking about deafrenal syndromes, whether it's Alport's or any other syndrome, we're talking about sensory neural hearing loss. And I want to clarify that you cannot get surgical treatments for sensory neural hearing loss, apart from the cochlear implant, which is only for very, very deaf individuals, and very specific criteria applied to the selection of these individuals. So yes, there are surgical options available to correct hearing loss, but there are different types of hearing loss to what you get with deafrenal syndromes and Alports. So just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and trying to get a cochlear implant on the NHS, you do have to be very, very severe before that happens. I knew one lady who was refused because her lip reading was too good. And if you try to do it privately, you're looking at a surgical, I think it's looking at upwards of £7,000 to £8,000 to get it done. But as Stamatia said, with essential or hearing loss, it would never be in the question really, because from a hearing aid point of view, you'd be a much superior sound.
And as cochlear implants, I think, produce something like 20 tones versus the thousands that we can hear through a hearing an ear with proper hearing. Aura, I think you have a few questions too.
Yeah, we had a question in the chat that's probably a very broad question, but Anthony, in your personal opinion, do you think it's worth paying the extra for private hearing aids over going with the NHS?
Again, it depends what NHS is available in your area at the time. Even people who have private hearing aids, I normally recommend to get a pair of NHS as well, so you've always got a backup should something happen to the private ones that you have. Now, on paper, yes, private should always be better than NHS because the features and the computer capacity is much, much greater. How that actually translates to your ear and your brain, though, will vary. I often say getting a hearing aid is a bit like getting a prosthetic limb. You can do a lot more with it than without, but it's never going to be like your original hearing. Now, our prosthetic limbs are getting much, much better, much closer to natural, but there will always be an element where it will be a bit artificial. And again, it depends on what hearing is left to work with as to what we can restore. And with Alports, it does vary greatly. It's one of the issues with this syndrome is that there's no rhyme or reason to it. From the little I've read, it can affect people in very dramatic different ways at different age points as well. So it will really be a case of an individual case-by-case situation as to whether it would be worth spending all the money or not, because again, it depends on how much money is, how much hearing is left to work with in the first place.
Yeah, great, thank you. Of course, it's finding what works for you. I did have another question. This is more about music and hearing aids. Is there a type of hearing aid, either around the outside or inside, that would be better for musicians?
This is something that's come in hearing aids more recently. Now, hearing aids had always been focused on speech. They neglected everything else. It was always speech, speech, speech. But over the last couple of years, the manufacturers have finally cottoned on that people do like to listen to music as well. So the music programs in hearing aids have got much, much better. But you normally do have to set it up as a separate program, because what that program will do is it will turn a lot of the suppression features off that the hearing aid normally has and allow the sound to get through more naturally. But some of the hearing aids now, so take for instance the Widex hearing aids, can now tell the difference between contemporary and classical music and has different settings for each. But again, it depends on where the hearing loss is as to how effective the hearing aid will be at restoring it for music. But they have got much better recently. But again, an NHS hearing aid, being the age it is, may not have those features, but again, some of them can be better than others. So again, it's on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you.
I wonder, Anthony, you've talked a little bit in the past to me and to a few others about the difference between audiologists and salespeople. And I wondered if you could expand a little bit about that, because the private sector does vary quite a lot. When we talk about hearing manufacturers, we're not talking about getting hearing aids from that manufacturer. We're often talking about going to someone, having a hearing test, and then being recommended models. What's your perspective on that?
Well, to start with, the big high street shops will be tied in with the manufacturer. That's one of the big secrets that's out there. So Boots are mostly owned by Phonak, and Specsavers do have a bit of everything, but they tend to get older models and rebrand them as their own hearing aids. Bloom Hearing are owned by Widex. Hidden Hearing are owned by Oticon. Who else is out there? Amplifon are normally owned by GM Resound. So if you want a truly a true choice, so to speak, your best hasn't got the ties in with particular manufacturers. Now, it's not to say that those manufacturers are bad. And sometimes going to those high street shops, you will get a better deal on those said manufacturers potentially. But it will limit your choice as to what's available to you. And again, every manufacturer does sound slightly different in some way. So if one manufacturer you try doesn't sound particularly good, it is always worth trying again with another one, just to see if that sound suits your brain, so to speak, better. But the other issue is that hearing takes a bit of time to adapt. Hearing is a defense mechanism. So any new sound you hear, the brain treats it as a threat initially, which is why it always sounds a bit much when you first get the hearing aids and turn them on. Which is why, again, as Stamatia said, if somebody comes and their hearing loss is quite advanced, that's why it can be quite hard for the patient to adapt, because you're suddenly getting all of this new sound. And the brain doesn't know what to do with it. It does take a lot longer to rehabilitate and get used to that sound again. Now, from the NHS point of view, they tend to set things at full prescription and say, we'll see you in 3 years' time. But privately, they should be able to set things at a more gradual level for you. But again, it's just trying to find somebody who you can trust. Now, salesmen will always come across as trustworthy. That's the problem. But again, all companies will have good and bad people in them. It's just a case of going and trying it. Try and find one that will give you a trial on a hearing aid as well, so you can try something without having to pay anything. But most of these companies will give you a 60-day money-back guarantee or something like that. But again, just make sure that they are going to give you all your money back and not take an admin fee and all this type of thing as well. So you just got to be careful when you are going and signing anything, that you are happy with the terms that are on the paper.
My experience with an independent audiologist was fantastic, actually. All I needed was hearing aids turned up a little bit, and he did it all for free, which was a huge surprise for me, and a fantastic moment. I just want to ask quickly, one of the weird things about Alport syndrome is it tends to strike people that are young, especially hearing loss. And integration with phones, as we've been seeing over the last couple of years with ReSound and others, is a huge selling point for Alport patients. I wonder if there's really a standout option for you if people want to have something that works well with their phone, or indeed works well with other devices like the TV or their computer or something.
To be honest, most of the manufacturers are much of a muchness from that point of view now. They all recognize that it is a very good selling point, and a lot of people are getting very connected with their devices. So all of them will have something that you can plug into the TV and get Dolby surround sound through the hearing aids. As I say, if you've got an Apple device, all of them will connect directly to it and stream through it. Android, as I say, is starting to catch up. GM ReSound, as I say, are the only ones that will link to it directly, as long as you've got an Android 10 or above. So from that, and from a sound point of view, they are all very, very similar. So again, the priority should always be the actual sound of speech around you, and making sure you're hearing in the environments you want to hear first and foremost. From a technology and connectivity point of view, the more recent hearing aid you can get, the better it will be.
That makes complete sense, and I think they'll all be loaded with algorithms that help balance hearing in noisy environments as well, which is also a huge priority if you're young and wanting to go out and that sort of thing. I just want to ask, because we've had it twice in chat, just very quickly, how often do you see your young patients? Did you have any Alport patients?
Well, as I say, I've normally seen people who are age 40 upwards. I don't tend to see many people who are young. So again, this is all new to me. I'm going to have 2 patients that are very young myself, with my 2 lads. So I'll let you know how that progresses. I've already obviously started to expose them to hearing aids, show them, let them have a play and things like that. My middle son, Harry, we had a bit of a scare because we thought his hearing had already gone. Turned out to be some kind of conductive blockage in his middle ear, which cleared up, which was good. But again, he was still able to have a play with the hearing aids, connect them to his iPad and things like that. So again, just the sooner you can get them used to using the devices, the better it will be in terms of their longevity of using them. Because again, there's still the stigma around them, but hearing aid manufacturers are looking at better designs, smaller designs, and designs which don't look like traditional hearing aids now. So hopefully that won't be a barrier for much longer.
Well, thank you, Anthony, so much for your expertise. It's been an enlightening chat, and you've led me on very nicely to the next part of our discussion, talking about people's experiences with hearing aids and hearing loss. It's really now time to hear from our patients about their experiences with hearing aids. I want to turn first to Max Stanton. Max and I are actually very similar in age, but at quite different points in our journey with Alport syndrome. I managed to get a transplant in December last year, but Max is scheduled later this month. Today, though, it's his hearing we're interested in. Max, how has your hearing affected your life as you've grown up with it?
It has played. It affected me more when I was slightly younger. I think it came as a bit of a. I remember it being quite a shock to me when I was actually in primary school when I got diagnosed with hearing loss, and I was around 7 or 8. And it took me a while to adapt to things. Sounded very, very different when I got given hearing aids, and also having, just being, it made me feel quite self-conscious. You got these big back during that time when I was around 7 or 8, the hearing aids are quite big, and you could definitely notice them. And I got very, very self-conscious about that all the way through secondary school, and I still had quite big hearing aids. And it's only now, within the past sort of 4 years or so, that I've managed to afford to buy some hearing aids which are being just fit right in the ear canal. So no one can really notice them at all. In terms of how it's sort of in other ways, it hasn't really made a huge difference. I think I've learned to kind of be at peace with it and accept it as it is. I come from I'm a musician basically, and it would seem that it probably would affect the way that I play music, but I feel that I've been able to play at the same level as my peers whenever I'm jamming, anything like that. I've never really felt like that I've struggled in any way to hear things, which has been fantastic, really. So that's probably as much as I could say about that in terms of affecting me.
Earlier on in life, I think you and I basically got them at pretty similar times, and we both had quite big ones. What did you find the reaction was from your peers to you having hearing aids? How did they take it?
Very curious about it. Some of them had no idea what it was. Some people thought I was some sort of spy, which is quite funny. They were genuinely quite interested by it. I never felt like I was sort of being bullied in any way. I think people would they would like come up to me like, "Oh, what's that you're in?" And I'd have to explain what it is, and then, "Oh yeah, okay, cool." And that did, after a while, that did become quite tiring, is that everybody wanted to know what it was. And it became less so when I got into secondary school, sort of more people kind of understood what it was, really need to ask.
That's my general impression with most kids, is the reaction tends to be curiosity rather than like derision or whatever. I think often, at least nowadays, the people that think most about our hearing aids it's us, right? It's not other people.
Absolutely. And I think also what I would say is that the teachers really helped in helping people understand what was going on. And there was one time I remember I think it was in year 6, I had one of my audiologists come in and pretty much do a presentation all about hearing aids and hearing loss, and that really helped a lot in me feeling accepted in some way, and people just kind of accepting that was a situation, and they were the way that they sort of communicated with me, they were a bit more patient, I think. And if I were to miss something, they would make sure that I've understood what it was. Whereas sort of earlier on, they would get a bit frustrated if I've missed out on something, and I don't really know why I've missed out on it. Understood why I haven't heard it.
I think communication with teachers is obviously a super important point. It's hard to admit that you have hearing aids, but once you start talking to your teachers about what you need and what's going to make learning easier for you, school tends to get a bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was lucky enough to get given, well, we sort of managed to sort out some microphones connected via Bluetooth loop during lessons to make it even easier for me to hear what the teacher's saying, and making sure that I'm at the front of the class so I can lip read much better, things like that. And yeah, it was, you know, it once all that was sorted out, it you know, it just, that was sort of the norm of it, really. So yeah, never felt like I really struggled as such during school because I was helped in that way. I think it's quite fortunate.
Yeah, I think you were very lucky. And teachers, we'll talk to a teacher in a bit, but they are surprisingly accommodating. Thank you so much, Max. Let's turn to Aura, I think, who's going to be talking to Wilma.
Great, thanks, Max. So now I was going to talk to Wilma. Wilma Calderwood. I'm glad that you could make it. It was a bit touch and go for a bit, but I'm glad you're here now. So Wilma runs our patient support page at Alport Warriors, and she's a mum to a son with Alport who at the moment is hard of hearing. So Wilma, my first question really relates to hearing aids. Has it been a challenge to get your son to wear his hearing aids consistently?
In one word, yes. When he was younger, it was so much easier because it was new to him, and because he had experienced the hearing loss before it, then when he actually was hearing more, it actually led him to wanting to wear them because he wasn't missing out on friends' conversations, things at school, even just at home. The TV, we noticed, was turned a lot lower down and we could actually converse, whereas previously we'd be saying, would you please turn that down? You know, it's far too loud. When he got a bit older, then obviously the onus was more on himself. School at primary was fantastic. The teachers were so good. It was a very small school. I went and explained to the teacher when we were diagnosed that he would need to have the hearing aids. She was very accommodating. She asked, is there anything she could do? She said she would chat with the other children in the class. The audiologist came out and sat him at the front, made sure some of the area was carpeted, some of it was hard flooring, which would help, you know, would affect his hearing. Older, yes, he would go wearing them, but chances are he didn't have a battery, or the battery ran out and he didn't have any more in his bag, or he didn't need them. That was, I used to get, sometimes he would say, I don't need them. You know, and I would say, well, yeah, honestly, you do need them. What have I just said? And he'd go, I don't know. Well, there you are. I'm trying to, you know. So yeah, the older he got, when he had more of the onus, it did become a bit more difficult with him wanting to actually wear them. He grew his hair long as well, which helped. I think that was just an aging stage, to be fair. He's a drummer, so that was his cool look with the longer hearing. The hearing aids were inside his ears as well. He was very fortunate that way. But now he's better, now that he's slightly older. He knows he needs them for work and just everyday conversation. So it has been a variety of different feelings for him.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. I think it was definitely an amazing thing that you were able to go to the school and tell them when he was quite young, so that they could help the other children understand that. I mean, was that your experience when he moved to secondary school, or was it slightly different?
It was, all his information was passed on from primary to secondary school. So the audiologist wasn't involved just as much, but his forum teacher, she was very aware of the situation. She actually asked, what was Alport's? What did it involve? She hadn't heard of it before. So I actually got the consultant at the time, I asked, could you possibly draft me just a very brief letter explaining? So we did that and we passed that in, and the teacher came back and said, I have passed that on to other teachers in the subjects he's using, because this is something we've never came across. We don't know what this is, and that actually has helped us to try and understand. So we've been very, very fortunate that way. His friends were fabulous. They accepted it so well. It was the same group of friends he went to secondary school with. Initially, when he got them, they knew there was something, but they didn't catch on it was his hearing to start with. They just thought he wasn't listening, or he was daydreaming, but once the hearing aids and it was explained, they actually were quite excited for him. You know, they were saying, wow, you can hear everything we're saying now. That's fantastic. Could I try them? Will it make me hear better? So it was quite a positive thing. There wasn't really much negativity there, which I was very thankful for.
Yeah, definitely. Great. I just did have one final tiny question about, I was aware that your son enjoyed swimming when he was younger. How was that with hearing aids?
Yes, that was a slightly challenge for him. He did other sports as well, but he also took swimming lessons. I actually had to approach the swimming teacher because obviously he couldn't wear hearing aids. With the surrounding, the pool was totally different. With being in the water, again, we were fortunate it was a small class, but she would make sure he was at the side of the pool, and she would explain first and ask him or say to him, could you wait a minute? And then she would tell everyone else, they would start, and then she'd say, right, Kieran, I would like you to. And then she would explain to him. He was always at the side nearest where she was, so that she was, and she used to say to him, just give me the thumbs up. If you're okay, you understand, just give me the thumbs up and then we'll continue. So we were very fortunate that way as well, which was good for him because it was something he wanted to do.
Great, thank you so much, Wilma. I'm now going to pass back to Patrick.
No problem.
Let's talk to Dan Long. Dan Long is a young Alport patient, and he's been working with hearing aids for many years. Dan, I wanted to ask you about your work first and foremost. What changes have you had to make to help deafness work for you in the workplace? Is he here? Oh, I do hope so. Dan is not here. Okay, that is no problem. We will have to move on. Or I think you're talking to Katie next, aren't you?
Yeah, great, no problem. So now we're going to talk to Katie Brown, one of our young adult Alport Avengers. So she was diagnosed with Alport Syndrome at a very young age, and she's going to share her family experience while she had her own family with hearing loss. She's also a newly qualified teacher, so congratulations, Katie. I just did have a quick question about how that was studying and having a career with hearing loss.
It can be challenging at times. I'm quite fortunate where I've worked in the school I'm in for nearly 7 years now, and all the staff and children are amazing. My biggest struggle with university was the lecture halls. I really struggled with them, just they're so big and echoey, and we actually got some clip in, because I have Octagon hearing aids, so they clip in phonic almost for it, which did help, but the echoing is definitely an issue in a lecture hall. However, I had somebody at university who used to scribe all my lectures for me, so she would just sit in a corner and scribe everything anybody ever said, so I always had the notes when I came away in case I did miss something, which was really helpful for me. In work, meetings can be a bit of an issue, but it's just something I've learned to adapt to, really. If I miss anything important, I'll always ask afterwards, or I'll turn to someone next to me and be like, what did they just say? Did I miss anything important? Lip reading is a godsend for me in staff meetings. And in the classroom, to be fair, the kids really hate that they can't whisper to each other, because even though I can't hear them, I can, which is brilliant for me, not so good for them.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask about how you were able to get a scribe when you were at university.
So when you apply for anywhere you go to university, which I'm sure Patrick and Laura, you'll know this, you apply for student finance. And attached there, you can apply for disability living allowance. So I applied for it. I just had to put in, I put in about my Alport, which actually helped me get extra time on a couple of assignments, which was quite nice. And mentioned my deafness. Then I went to their version of occupational health and had a meeting with them, and they basically just asked me what I would like, what would meet my needs as a student. And as I said to them, my biggest worry is the lecture halls, and they provided the scribe for me there and then. I didn't have to pay for it. It came all from through disability living allowance, so from the government essentially. If I wasn't in university for whatever reason, she would still go to the lectures and take notes for me and then email them to me. So yeah, it's through disability living allowance through your student finance.
Great, yeah, that's amazing. My next question was more geared towards raising your daughter with hearing loss. I know you mentioned previously that you used to sleep with your hearing aids in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just wanted to know what that was kind of like, having a daughter whilst you can't hear that well.
Yeah, first of all, I should probably say that you aren't really supposed to sleep with hearing aids in, and I can feel the audiologist currently staring into my soul right now, being like, you shouldn't do that. And I know you shouldn't do that. But for me, it's always been so my husband used to work shifts, and having a young child, my fear was always, if I didn't have my hearing aids in during the night and something happened, I wouldn't know about it. So I just got into the habit of sleeping with my hearing aids. I do have the correct fire alarms, the fire brigade. I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but for free, they will come and fit proper fire alarms for the deaf in as well, which is always good to have. They are very loud and very bright when they do go off. So don't burn your bacon on a Sunday morning, because you'll irritate your whole street, not just your neighbours. And I do have alarm clocks and stuff, but yeah, I can't not sleep without my hearing aids in. But when Tegan was born, she was actually, I'm going to tell you Tegan's story, but just put in perspective. So Tegan was a premature baby due to my Alport, and I was very fearful when she came home, because she was very small and very petite, that she was just going to break essentially. And because of my deafness, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but my biggest fear is that she would cry and I wouldn't be able to hear her, and people would report me for being a bad mum for not being able to hear my child cry, which sounds ridiculous because that was never going to happen. But as a new young deaf mum, that was my biggest fear. I am still, and at the time was really good friends with my teacher of the deaf from school, and I just messaged her and essentially just said, what do I do? And she put me in touch with adult services, which is like social services, but for adults. And they provided me with it's like a vibrating pad that goes in the baby's cot. And then I had the other half of it under my pillow. So when she cried, if I didn't hear her, it would set off the vibrating and it would wake me up. And that was fantastic, because I could take it anywhere with me. So I could leave her in her Moses basket and go around the house. And I never had to worry about not hearing her cry. If that makes sense.
No, that's great. That sounds like a great thing to have. So Katie, you wear your hearing aids for a long period of time. Does that not exhaust you? Is that quite difficult to do?
I think I'm just used to it now. I obviously do take them out when I go in the bath, because that would break them. I sometimes when I come in, because I don't know if anybody's ever been in the classroom, but I have 37 children in my class, and at times it can be very loud and very overbearing. Yeah, it's not fun. It's not fun for a hearing person, let alone a deaf person. So occasionally when I come home, I do take them out, but I know Wilma knows this, but my whole family sign. I was taught to sign from a very young age, and my daughter knows how to sign, as does my husband. So occasionally, if I'm a bit overwhelmed, I'll just take my hearing aids out and we'll sign to each other instead. So I don't really miss out on anything like that. Not so much now because she's a teenager, but when she was younger, if she was having a particularly bad behaviour day, I would just take my hearing aids out and I couldn't hear her anymore. It was beautiful. So she could stand, cry, kick and scream and just take them out, nothing there. So I don't have them in 24/7. I do take them out and let my ears breathe, which again, audiologists, I know that's very important, and I do that. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much for sharing your experience, Katie. I think I'm now going to pass back to Patrick.
I thought it was interesting you mentioned not wearing hearing aids while you're in the bath. It's amazing how resilient hearing aids are. I think mine have survived. They've survived dips in the ocean. When I was in hospital to get a new kidney, I ended up popping one in my glass of water, and it came out fine. I can barely hear the difference. Poor Anthony's shaking his head. I probably shouldn't. It's traumatic for an audiologist to hear that sort of thing, I imagine. Our final interviewee is Susie Gear. She's probably familiar to most of you on the call as the CEO of Alport UK. She's raised 2 sons with hearing loss and has started using hearing aids herself over the last 5 years. Susie, my first question really is, what's it been like starting to use hearing aids as an adult rather than a kid? This is a relatively unique thing for at least for Alport patients.
Yeah. To be honest, Patrick, it was quite hard to begin with. I'm kind of a creature of habit, and I couldn't seem to fit putting hearing aids into my daily routine, my work routine. I was a really busy consultant running lots of workshops and things, but it actually it became more necessary because I work with a lot of international people, and I often, because of their accents, I wasn't hearing. So it was a kind of a mixture of actually the need. I was desperate to hear a bit more because I was losing things and looking like a bit of an idiot, not hearing questions. But also, I have to say, it was my 2 boys nagging me because they were so efficient about literally putting them on in the morning like a pair of spectacles, and then they take them off last thing at night before they went to bed. That actually them nagging me, and I think they were also lecturing me. They learned from Stamatia at an information day we had in Edinburgh that you begin to lose your sort of neural pathways, and the brain doesn't recognize those sounds. So I got lots of lectures from my children about it, and so it was kind of a combination of need and a bit of nagging.
As you said, your boys have also have both been diagnosed at the point when you got hearing aids. You hadn't yet been diagnosed with hearing loss, although people obviously did know you had Alport. Do you think there was a period where you had lost some function and weren't aware of it? This period that our speakers earlier discussed as being a bit of a problem with Alport patients.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. As a mother, you spend your time, worrying about your kids. And in fact, my kids, being 2 boys, were growing very fast. And in fact, I was having a quiet chuckle when Stamatia said, annual hearing aid or hearing tests. Actually, my boys needed them about every 2 to 3 months because they were growing so quickly. Their molds were dropping out because their ears were growing and things. It was a really challenging time. So to be honest, I spent all the time in the audiologist with the children rather than looking after myself. So I'm sure you're right. I probably lost quite a bit of hearing before I'd really noticed it or had time to.
This question I was going to ask Dan is how he's managed hearing aids in the workplace and hearing loss in the workplace. Have your colleagues been able to accommodate your hearing loss?
Oh, yes, it's really tricky, isn't it? I have to admit, to begin with, I didn't admit my hearing loss. I worked at a very senior level in an American firm. 99% of the people were male. And I was a woman sort of forging a career at the time. So it was very hard to admit things like that. But it's interesting now, it doesn't seem to be quite so much of an issue, and I'm much more gutsy now because I have to wear hearing aids. So I'll quite often at the beginning of a Zoom call, I'll announce right at the beginning, say, I'm really sorry, I'm hard of hearing. I will fuss around whether I can see people. So if their name obscures their mouth and I can't lip read, I'll get them to move. So I am a bit of a trial in that way. But actually, once I've got it all sorted, then we can get on. And in fact, I think people respect me more for kind of requesting some of that, because they kind of feel informed, they can do something that helps you. So I think they feel more helpful as a result. So I feel a bit of an idiot in those early days, not admitting my hearing loss. And maybe I should have done earlier, but I think the world around us is much more open to things now, so it's much easier, really.
I think especially nowadays, hearing aids have a certain cool factor. They're a real novelty. I know that Max's were kind of referred to as spy help. Katie, you've got an anecdote about how your kids treated your hearing aids when they first encountered them.
Yeah. A few weeks ago we were doing, it was Alex Rider. I remembered the book today. So we're doing Alex Rider in English, and they had to create some spy gadgets. And most of them were doing pens, blah, 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 blah. And one of the girls just kept staring at me as I'm walking around the classroom. And when one of the year six is staring at you, it's normally something's wrong. And I just was like, are you all right? And she's like, yeah, I'm just trying to enjoy a hearing aid, because she wanted to use that as her spy gadget, which I honestly, I said to these, I could have cried. It was like, and I just took it out, cleaned it and put it on a table. And I was like, you can use it. And yeah, it was the most amazing experience for me that she wanted to use my hearing aid as a spy gadget. That was pretty cool.
That's so unbelievably sweet. Oh my goodness. Wilma, sport, I think, Katie as well, how do you manage hearing aids when you're doing sport? Have you got any tips because obviously a huge part of Alport syndrome is you need to stay active, but keeping hearing aids in when you're running about on a football pitch is a nightmare. Wilma first, how did your son deal with that?
I'm ashamed to say he wasn't really into football, unfortunately, sorry.
It's fine, I'm not either. I don't enjoy it.
He did like his martial arts. He did like those. And sometimes, again, yeah, it was a bit, especially if they were doing the warm-up or they were sparring with each other, then it could be awkward for him. And again, I had spoken with the sensei previously, explaining that he did have quite a bad hearing loss. I said, so if he looks at you vacantly, he's not being unruly, he just genuinely didn't hear or understand what you said to him. So again, he made sure he was at the front, and he would always check before they did any of the katas, before they did any of the moves, everybody okay, you know what you're doing. And it was a different group of friends, but again, I don't know if it's because we're in the country, it was quite small class. Everyone would sort of look out for him, and they would always say to him, did you hear that? Do you know what we have to do next? And sometimes he would go, sorry, and they go, right, okay, you didn't. So they would explain it to him as well. So he really has been quite fortunate over the years, even older as well. When he was in his band and he was the drummer, I thought of all the instruments to choose, they had to choose drums. I thought, seriously, but he seemed to cope fine with it then as well, The bandmates would always sort of cue, you see some of the bands, the drummer hits the sticks 1, 2, 3 and then go. Well, the lead guitarist would actually sort of turn it and sort of point the neck of the guitar as if, right, and that's us, we're on now. And it never looked out of place. It just looked as if they were just having fun and jamming together, which was really nice. And they would always let him finish rather than them finish. So he would decide if he wanted to do a bit more of a fill in the drop. They'd be like, come on, this song finished 2 seconds ago and you're still playing. So he managed really well that way.
That's good to hear. I think it's a rough situation, but we all get around it. Katie, just quickly, what are your experiences with sport and hearing aids?
Yeah, I play football. I don't really have any issues with my hearing aids staying in. I think for me, my advice would be, and I hope this is the right advice. If your hearing aids are a bit loose, your tubes are probably a bit too long. So my hearing aids are quite tight on my ear, so they're fitted. I've never had issues with running out, like coming out. I do have issues with them whistling if I run quite a lot. They do tend to whistle a little bit. just got used to that. My coach doesn't particularly like me very much because I struggle to hear him if I'm at the other end of the pitch. But I just rely on my teammates to tell me what I need to do or where I need to go or whatever.
Well, it's a great excuse for ignoring someone on the sidelines, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. Normally my husband, to be fair, he's normally the one telling me, and I'm like, can't hear you, sorry.
I used to take them out in actual maths classes, so I'm probably the worst offender on there. Anthony, I think you had a few comments on hearing aids.
Yeah, it's just nice to know there's a fellow drummer around. One of my favorite hobbies at the moment. Yeah, just a few people mentioning about not noticing or not doing anything about their hearing initially for a little while. I think the statistics at the moment is it takes someone on average 7 years from noticing they've got issue with their hearing before they do something about it. So it's quite staggering at the moment. People are actually doing something about their hearing. But one of the reasons for that, especially as, again, the little I've read on hearing loss with Alports, is it tends to be the middle and high tones that go. We don't tend to rely on those sounds all the time, particularly in quieter environments when there's only a few people around us. So you probably only find in certain situations where you're actually having a difficulty. And human nature then is to blame everything else but ourselves. They've started mumbling, oh, it's too noisy here, that's why I can't hear. And again, that's what adds on to the delay of actually doing something about it, because we'd like to say everybody else is mumbling first. But yeah, as I say, it's quite a staggering statistic that it does take somebody that long, and that's the average. So some people are taking longer than that before they're actually doing something about it, which is, again, quite staggering.
I think the key thing that we should take away from this is that you need to get tested proactively, especially as a young Alport patient. If you know you have Alport syndrome, you need to be on hearing tests so that we can track that decline. Thank you so much, Anthony. Stamatia has some interesting points about funding private hearing aids as well. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. There is the Access to Work scheme that if you're in full-time employment and you have hearing loss, you can apply for help and you can get private hearing aids, which means premium devices, which are going to be smaller. They're going to have the best noise suppression features and the best speech recognition algorithms, and they're going to be octa-core like your latest smartphones, etc., all in a very, very tiny device. And it's worth it. I mean, it is quite a bit of a hassle. You need to get a letter from your local audiologist saying that you are fitted with NHS hearing aids and that's the best NHS can do for you. And despite all that, you're still struggling, which is not far from reality for most of the hearing aid users who are in full-time employment. And then they will send people over, assess you. They will most likely, first of all, suggest ridiculous amounts of useless equipment, massive in size, that you're not going to find any use. And once you reject all that and you persevere and you stick your heels in, you're going to get the funding. And I'm talking about thousands of pounds that the government can allocate to you to get hearing aids. Yeah, and I've done it because when I worked for the NHS, I was consulting privately as well. And I've done it for an Alport patient and they got the hearing aids just fine in the end. I've done it for other patients that were in full-time employment that did not even have a syndrome and they got the hearing aids. It is a bit of a red tape struggle against, the beast of bureaucracy, but you'll get your money in the end. You pay for the hearing aids and then you get your hearing aids and then the supplier, the dispenser gets the money from the government or the employer, or you pay the most of the amount you're going to end up paying is about 20% of the cost of hearing aids, which is peanuts compared to how they cost. And they're going to be Bluetooth enabled. You can stream your music, which patients love, especially the younger ones. The quality of music is just brilliant with Bluetooth these days. And you're just going to love them. Just go for it. Anyone in full-time, just go for it.
I think it's a fantastic option because Anthony just described this kind of difference between having to get NHS and private. You sort of have the best of both worlds if someone else is paying for your private hearing aids. So a fantastic option. Thank you both, and thank you all to all of our patients and indeed mums of people living with hearing loss. The takeaway for me really has been make sure that you have the appropriate help that you need. And that means good testing. It means regular testing of your hearing. And it also means making sure that you're getting tested early and understanding what options are available to you. We should mention that the disability access scheme that Stamatia is talking about is obviously only available to people in the UK. So I'm assuming it'll be a little different if you're in Europe or across the rest of the world, as we know some of our viewers tonight are.
Be living and working in the UK, obviously.
Yeah, sure. I think that's about it from us. It's been a fantastic talk. Thank you so much to everyone that contributed. I do want to finish, as we always do, with a little poll. So the people that are still here, we should have a link that's just been pasted in chat, or will be pasted in chat. Our producers are a little slow today. It's nice weather. We can't blame them. I think they're all I don't know, outside enjoying themselves. Don't make me find the link. If I have to find the link, I will. All right, here we go. I'm looking for the link in. There we go. It's happened. Sorry, everyone. We're a little slow today. We'll make sure Archie's reprimanded. So do click on that link and just give us one word to summarize how you're feeling after watching these presentations. So one word to describe your feeling after watching all of these wonderful speakers today. I will selfishly put one in myself. Turning back, informed, fantastic, reassured. Tana in chat saying it's important, it's fantastic to hear the subject properly discussed. Yes, I don't think we talk enough about it. It's clearly a very important topic, especially to Alport patients, and there's such a diverse range of experiences. It's so important to be giving this the attention it deserves. And it is a great change from hearing about kidney stuff. Yes, I feel slightly more confident on this topic because normally I end up talking about very new research and I'm a little bit more out of my depth. We've got a few responses coming in now. Informed, educated, a fantastic word cloud. Well, thanks everyone for coming to the talk today. And please do let us know if you have any topics or research that you would like us to talk about in our future workshops.
Our next workshop this year is on Wednesday, the 7th of July, and will feature the latest research from Mary Nabatty at Texas AMU on Alport Dog Colony and CRISPR research. And we also will be having a talk from Monica Falano on autosomal dominant Alport syndrome.
We also want to let you know about our very exciting event happening on Saturday, the 31st of July. 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. is an online Alport information day. We'll have the latest on clinical trials, nutrition, exercise, and of course, experts on hand to answer your questions as we've had today. Most importantly, it's free for patients to join and it is open to absolutely everyone. That date again, the 31st of July from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I'm sure we'll be sending some sort of email about it in the coming weeks. The patient day actually follows a scientific conference for all the scientists watching, Podocyte 2021, where scientists from around the world are discussing what goes wrong with podocytes in the Alport kidney. All the information you need is available through the link in chat. It says now on the script, but I don't know, we've had a few delays in the past. So there should be a link in chat coming with all the information you need on Podocyte 2021. Aura.
Great, so that's a huge thank you to Stamatia and Anthony for sharing their expertise and helping us understand more about hearing loss in Alport syndrome. I'm also going to thank all our patients who have shared their stories today, and to our scientific experts as usual, Neil Turner and Rachel Lennon.
Finally, we really appreciate Kidney Research UK for your sponsorship. They help fund our Zoom subscription and they support our charity, providing help for hundreds of patients each year. If you have any feedback about the session that can't be contained inside one single word, or you want to be added to our mailing list, please email research@allports.info.
Patients can join the Alport Warriors Facebook group, and anyone can hit us up on our Twitter and Instagram pages. They are both @Alport UK. We'll get a recording of this talk up in YouTube in a couple of days. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching.